Colleagues, we want to begin our work in the session The Road to War in Southeastern Europe. Dobro jutro, dame i gospodo. Počet ćemo s radom u našoj sekciji Putevi do rata u jugoistočnoj Europi. I want to ask the lecturers, Mr. Nikola Samardžić, Marko, Attila, Hoare, Dalibor, Jovanovski i Maroš Mellichárek. Are they here? Please sit down in the first row, if it's possible.
Doesn't matter. You're okay here.
Okay. In this case, I ask Mr. Nikola Samardžić. Okay, please.
I apologize for being obliged to sit, as I cannot reach the microphone otherwise. I will speak in English, and when interested can get my article in Serbian, Bosnian, etc., whatever it is. As we all know, the First World War began in Southeastern Europe and originated from a local conflict. Will you close the door, please? Thank you. While the contemporaries were unable to predict the scope and dynamics of a domino effect that threatened to link the events. In political and economic contexts of imperialism and the Second Industrial Revolution, Southeastern Europe has been an obstacle to the interests of Germany, Austria and Russia, impatient to reach the supreme power level in international order. Invisibly to the contemporaries, a general struggle to establish a new distribution of forces was leading to a path of self-destruction. Partly Ottoman, partly Habsburg, and once partly Venetian province, the Balkans have since long been the subject of bad-tempered attitudes of European powers. Almost the entire century, international relations were disturbed only in conflicts that managed to remain local, even when first-rate participant powers have been involved. In broad historical context, economic, technological, cultural, and urban development at the turn of the centuries was not followed by identical progress in democracy or international relations. The tragic stream of impetuous decisions was revealing an increasing complexity of mutual misunderstandings and was clear enough a tendency to resolve disputes by force in an increasingly complex, thus sensitive structure of international relations, further disrupted by aligning along inconsistent and ruthless alliances. The Balkan Wars in 1912 and 13 indicated the general deadlock, while the future futility in fatal collapse could not be perceived. In the meantime, the second-degree forces as Austria-Hungary, Germany and Russia were beginning to consider war as an acceptable surrogate to diplomacy which accounted with its crawling activities during the previous decades for less meaningful and effective. The conflict of Austria-Hungary and Serbia that contributed to the outbreak of the First World War took place at the peak of a composite political crisis that took place on the periphery of the major political and economic systems. Up to 1867, Serbia established full control over the cities by expulsion of the Turkish crew. That same year, the Habsburg monarchy established a new constitutional order. The new dynamics of international relations emerged due to the retraction of Britain and Russia in European continental relations, trapped in the Eastern question paradigm. Thus, even small local incidents acquired general significance. The layout of Balkans' huge malignancy was still just an exotic decoration of the historical mainstream, which sometimes tended to conceal big decisions and interests. Interpretations of the Sarajevo assassinations from 1914 are not accidentally extended to the entire width of the contemporary historical stage. The emergence of new states in the second half of the 19th century has further complicated the international relations. Unification of Italy and Germany contributed to the new imperial rivalries. New peripheral states, whose independence was recognized in 1878, encouraged the nationalisms whose crisis potentials have provoked international order deprived of effective regulatory mechanisms in that matter. Nationalisms have grown primarily in the areas of metastatic feudalism and perhaps due to the failure of the mid-century liberal revolutions. In 1878, the actual state of order was confirmed and the legitimist reaction era was definitely closed. Autonomist movements in Bosnia and Herzegovina, with origins in deep and specific national and social stratification, somewhat calmed and improved thanks to the institutional changes brought by the Austro-Hungarian occupation. Relations of Austria and Serbia from 1867 to 1914 have gradually decayed to the detriment of both sides. The mutual positive historical experience, as noted in peace treaties concluded by Austria and Turkey in Karlovitz and during the 18th century, was becoming irrelevant. These contracts were not only early documents of international law, but also stimulus for the economic development and cross-border cooperation, while discerning interest reciprocity of new Habsburg order in Southeastern Europe and Serbian national revolution. The last decades of the 19th century also rejected the legacy of Romanticism that associated the distant folk groups and historical period, while adopting the intersigence paradigm of Slavic and Germanic world. Balkan nations were seeking international support by emphasizing all their ethnic peculiarities and fatal historical justice. Their ethnic and territorial interests were usually mutually exclusive in disputed territories and areas of infinitely complex ethnic relations, no matter whether these relations in the near or distant historical perspective were real or imaginary. Ethnic issues have become a topic of political, scientific, and pseudo-scientific campaigns and manipulation. The Ottoman Empire staggered to recover from the economic recession and the occasional peripheral disintegration. Balkan national movements revealed the misunderstanding, even the non-acceptance of modernization and democratization, etc., etc. Cataclysm in the First War was the consequence of political irresponsibility. Elites are ready or unable to adapt. In Serbian case, the Serbian interests and destiny to the relations of international relations and the possibilities of an undeveloped and predominantly agrarian society. The militarization of Serbian politics was one of the outcomes of institutional weakness, while influential politicians and important public personalities supported or even encouraged the aggressive foreign policy. Simultaneously, the economic and cultural development of the Serbian community in Bosnia and Herzegovina under Austrian rule was seriously disturbing the violent expansionist tendencies in official and circuit cycles of Serbian politics. If there is a need of a very specific example, and relatively well known to us ex-Yugoslavs, the intentional deceptions of Serbian Bosnian writer Petar Kočić, who vividly portrayed the Habsburg administration's bureaucratic cruelty, seemed to have revived the very similar popular memories of the Austrian rule in Belgrade and Serbia during the 18th century. During the years preceding the war, events in Southeastern Europe were accelerated within the unfortunate chronicle of irrational feelings and actions. Irresponsible personalities in Serbian politics and military challenged the Austro-Hungarian rule in Bosnia and Herzegovina without hesitation or violence, devoid of consciousness of collective consequences that actually subsequently occurred. Serbia was apparently missing time and prudence in the need to consider the winning Balkan wars in enlightenment of casualties, losses, and short-term, both in ethnic and international relations. In July crisis, Serbia and Austria revealed the absence of good faith. The idea of the Austrian Empire survival had additionally burdened Vienna and also Berlin, thus preventing a subtle adjustment to the realities. In the whirlwind of international and regional relations, official and public Serbia has ignored or even despised the long-term importance of relatively rapid modernization of Bosnia and Herzegovina under Austrian occupation and rule. That process, although was taking place in political and ruling framework considered as hostile, was revealing possibilities of a broad regional prosperity, particularly in relation to the previous period of Ottoman disintegration, and especially was encouraging the Serbian-Croatian capacities, including the influence from the neighborhood. The logic of an era that I was analyzing from 1878 to 1914 became obsolete in international crisis that preceded the outbreak of the First World War. The official irresponsibility of both Serbia and Austria-Hungary also characterized all other participants involved. Although at the very beginnings, the war has not been supposed to take so many human and material losses. Not by incident, Sarajevo has remained a symbol and the victim of the processes that preceded the First World War and throughout the 20th century, becoming at the end one of its most tragic and eloquent symbols. My personal relation to First World War was by my grandfather, Vaso Samardžić, who was distinguished citizen of Sarajevo. He went with his two brothers to Serbia to fight on Serbian sides, and two of his brothers were killed. So we remained very few in my family. I'm proud of his courage and my family courage, but time has changed. And today Serbia, Austria and Bosnia are not Serbia, Austria, Bosnia from the century that preceded. I also had a chance to meet Vaso Čubrilović, one of the participants in Sarajevo accident in 28 June in 1914. I remember him as very educated, intelligent, but also arrogant, authoritarian, and of course pro-Russian, pro-Soviet personality. And I came here in good faith, but also feel sad and not discouraged, of course, by the fact that not much of our colleagues and institutions were ready and willing to take place in this wonderful conference. Thank you very much, and I hope that you will get opportunity to read my article if you need it at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Samardžić. It's a great pleasure for us that you come here. Please, Mr. Marko Attila Hoare.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the roots of the Serbo-Austrian War of 1914. And one of the things I'm interested in is sort of long-term structural dynamics in Serbian history, which might have led to this conflict. Often when talking about the First World War, there's such a groundbreaking, such a sort of momentous conflict, such a huge impact on world history that it's forgotten the extent to which it began as a Balkan War. And we're familiar with the fact that it began as, that it expanded to become an imperial conflict involving Britain, France, Russia, Austria-Hungary, Germany, fighting over their conflicting imperial interests. But it did begin as a sort of a Balkan war between two Balkan states, Austria-Hungary, and Serbia. And in the most recent extensive examination of this conflict by Christopher Clark of Cambridge University, he actually does give due attention to this factor. So you need to look at the relationship between Serbia and Austria-Hungary to understand how the war arose. And these were two states that had for decades enjoyed a very close and complex relationship. Now, there weren't equals, of course. Austria-Hungary was in some sense one of the great European powers. Serbia was a new Balkan state, a regional power. So it's not entirely fair to see them as co-equal, as equally responsible. But nor is it true that Serbia was simply a complete passive victim in this conflict. So it's more a question of two uneven powers, each of which had predatory designs on the other one. And although I want to stress at the start that, I consider Austria-Hungary to bear the greater share of responsibility rather than Serbia for the outbreak of this conflict, nevertheless, what I'm looking at here really are the sort of structural factors that would explain why Serbia found itself at war with Austria-Hungary in 1914. Now, it wasn't an inevitable war, if you like, and there had always been Serbian politicians who had supported collaboration with Austria-Hungary. You have a strong, perhaps a dominant interpretation in the former Yugoslavia and perhaps in Serbia today, which will view Serbia's war effort against Austria-Hungary as a kind of natural outcome of Serbia's own struggle for national liberation and unification. But it could equally be seen as a kind of a completely unnecessary disaster. And it has to be remembered again that the outcome of 1918, when Austria-Hungary collapsed and Serbia emerged on the winning side and was able to establish a united Yugoslav state, that wasn't foreordained. Going back a few months, it could be seen that the war was a disaster for Serbia, in which perhaps, by some accounts, perhaps 20% of its population died. It was militarily occupied and crushed by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Bulgaria. And the fact that ultimately Serbia emerged on the winning side in the war was kind of an accident, if you like. The United States intervened to bring about an Allied victory, and the Allied victory enabled Serbia to be liberated. So it was a national disaster which Serbia experienced in the First World War, which had a sort of unexpected happy ending for Serbia's leadership. So I want to sort of go back and try and look at the roots of this tragedy. Ever since it emerged in the first half of the 19th century as a new modern national state, Serbia lived under the shadow of Austria or of Austria-Hungary. And there was a sort of link between the two states through the Serbs of Austria. The Serbs of Austria had played a major role in developing Serbia as a state through developing its cultural and other cultural, educational institutions, its armed forces, and so forth, to make up the lack of native educated Serbian people. And for long periods of the 19th century, Serbia was a satellite of Austria-Hungary, particularly in the reign of Prince Alexander Karađorđević in the 1850s, and again under the Obrenović kings in the 1880s and 1890s. And during the revolutions of 1848-1849, Serbia sent volunteers to fight on the Habsburg side against the Hungarians. When Serbia emerged as an independent state in 1878, it did so as a satellite, an ally of Austria-Hungary. Of course, as I'm sure people are aware that Russia at this point favoured Bulgaria and abandoned Serbia, so Serbia turned towards Austria-Hungary. Now, the Serbian army then expanded following independence in 1878 as the project of the very pro-Austrian ruler Milan Obrenović, and the Austrian orientation remained strong among the Serbian officer corps all the way up until the 20th century. Vienna viewed sort of control of Serbia as a national interest and was prepared to use any degree of bullying or coercion, ultimately military force, to keep Serbia within its own sphere of influence. But at the same time, Serbia's own expansionist tendencies created a latent tension between it and Austria-Hungary. And Gerashinin's famous blueprint or plan of 1844 envisaged Serbia's expansion into Bosnia-Herzegovina. But then when Austria-Hungary occupied Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1878, it created a kind of conflict between the two states. So from the point of view of Serbian politicians, you had a question of for or against the Austrian orientation. And those who favoured more collaboration with Austria-Hungary were prepared to look away from Bosnia-Herzegovina and look southwards for expansion into Kosovo, into what's today Kosovo, and Macedonia. Austria-Hungary would permit this only so far as Serbia remained a kind of dependable ally. King Milan Obrenović and his successor, King Alexander, well, King Milan Obrenović was the most pro-Austrian of Serbian rulers, and his son, Alexander Obrenović, was a bit more ambivalent. But on the other hand, you had this opposition force in Serbia, the Radical Party, the People's Radical Party under Nikola Pasic, which was much more ideologically pro-Russian. And these two wings represented the two sides of Serbia, the two Serbias, if you like, the sort of the modern Serbia of the bureaucracy, the army and the monarchy, and which was in this period sort of pro-Austrian or pro-Austro-Hungarian, and a kind of the Serbia of the peasantry represented by the Radical Party, Nikola Pasic, which was pro-Russian, to sort of simplify a little bit. So the question of for or against an Austrian orientation was not just a foreign policy question, it was deeply related to Serbia's internal politics. Now, the internal developments in the start of the 20th century meant that this sort of balance between a pro-Austrian monarchy and a sort of pro-Serbian opposition, if you like, pro-Russian opposition, was resolved in such a way that the pro-Austrian monarchy was destroyed, and the new kind of power-sharing arrangement in Serbia was between the pro-Russian radicals and the new faction, the officer corps, the conspirators who had killed King Alexander in 1903, who also ended up being anti-Austro-Hungarian. So you had a kind of power-sharing arrangement between two factions who were in rivalry with each other, but both kind of oriented towards hostility towards Austria-Hungary. And this kind of relationship, to some extent, explains how Austria-Hungary found itself, how Serbia found itself at war with Austria-Hungary in 1914. So the sort of paradox of Serbia's road to war is that it was the work of these members of his Black Hand organization, Unification or Death, under Dimitrijević Apis, who were children of a sort of officer corps that had traditionally been Austrian-oriented. The Black Hand organization grew out of the conspirators who had murdered King Alexander in 1903, But as the eminent Serbian statesman Vladan Đorđević remarked, Alexander's real killer was his own father, King Milan. Milan had been the commander of a Serbian army under Alexander. As a former king, came back to lead the Serbian army. It was his opposition to Alexander's marriage to Queen Draga which set the ball of conspiracy rolling among the officer corps. The main purpose of the Serbian army under the Obrenović regime had been to keep the regime in power, to keep the peasants down, to control the radical party. And the army had been used by King Milan to crush the major rebellion that broke out, the Timok uprising in 1883. So his army was ultimately geared towards internal repression against the regime's enemies. But as a kind of, if you like, a sort of overproduction of officers, the regime generated too many officers who couldn't find an outlet for their own ambitions in the regime. And then under King Alexander, after he succeeded Milan, the officer corps' position declined and their wages went into arrears and they felt frustrated. And this kind of structural factors then led to the conspiracy against Alexander and then in turn to the formation of unification or death, the Black Hand. So this traditional then fissure in Serbian political life between the radicals and the officers and the monarchy was then replaced by a sort of fissure between two partners, the Black Hand and the radicals. And the Black Hand continued its sort of inherited its form of contempt to the radicals and the peasants and pursued a kind of a policy towards Serbian government in the period after 1903 and towards the outside world that dragged Serbia into war. So although Nikola Pasic and his radicals, they were oriented towards Russia and towards friendship with France, nevertheless they hadn't wanted war to break out in 1914, but they were dragged into war, if you like, by the actions of this extremist circle in the officer corps under the Black Hand. They weren't able to control their own army and border guards and could not prevent the assassination from taking place. In his later years, King Alexander Obrenović had moved Serbia away from his father's pro-Austrian policy and began to try and pursue a policy of sort of alternating between Russian and Austrian orientations, balancing the two parties. So the Austro-Hungarians were ready to accept the coup against him. And this coup d'etat of 1903 was the work largely of a pro-Austrian elite. So members of the conspiracy that overthrew Alexander were men like Jovan Atanacković and Jovan Abakumović, pro-Austrian, pro-Habsburg officials. Yet, ironically, it was the conspiracy then gave birth to the Black Hand movement that dragged Serbia into war. One of the sort of structural conflicts that emerged from this conspiracy was a conflict between the older conspirators under people like Atanacković and Damian Popović, Alexander Mashin, and the younger ones under Dimitrievich Apis, those who would sort of voice of Tankosic, those who would sort of become founders of the Black Hand. And the older ones had this kind of traditional pro-Austrian line, which then became apparent during the gun controversy, when a question arose of whether Serbia should buy its arms, its artillery from the Austrian firm of Skoda or the French firm of Schneider-Krussow. And these older conspirators were sort of inclined towards the Austrian option, but were then pushed out by pressure from the younger ones under Apis, by the sort of the government under Nikola Pasic, sort of the radicals, and by diplomatic pressure from the British. So this kind of traditional pro-Austrian part of the elite was then pushed to the sidelines, and you had then this kind of duality between the emerging group under Apis and the radicals under Nikola Pasic. So you had these two centres of power which then worked in competition to one another, helping to move Austria towards Serbia towards war with Austria-Hungary. Now, as you bear in mind that Pasic's own strategy, although he was himself Russian-oriented, he had also supported the southward expansion into Macedonia, Kosovo, and following the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913, he favoured a long period of sort of peace to try and assimilate this new territory, which was ethnically Macedonian, mostly Macedonian and Albanian, to assimilate it into the Serbian state. But then he found his policy being undercut by these extremists in the Black Hand who were, trying to sort of provoke conflict with Austria-Hungary. And this assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was part of his policies of Apis, his extremist circle of sort of pursuing expansion through terrorism and also undercutting the civilian leadership of Serbia, for which they had no respect. So I just want to round it up. I mean, Serbia, the official Serbian government in 1914 did not want war with Austria-Hungary, but because of its peculiarity of having this army with this sort of essentially independent power base under this extremist organisation, they were pushed into conflict, and that should be seen as the culmination of a long-term developments in Serbian history. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are very different roads to the First World War, and one of the most complicated roads to war had Greece. Please, Mr. Dalibor Jovanovski.
He's not here.
He's not here. In this case, please, Mr. Maroš Mellichárek, come here.
So, dear colleagues, dear conference participants, I'm really honored I can describe my research on occasion of this beautiful conference. So, the title of my presentation is Foreign Policy of Serbia towards Bosnia and Herzegovina before the breakup of the First World War. So, consider it as a part of the bigger section, so I will try to skip unnecessary parts. So my whole article was further divided into several sections. So the first, the introductions, aims of the article, and brief analysis of historiography. Then, and the most important for today is the issue of Serbo-Bosnian relations, some kind of methodological aspects. Then, the next part was devoted to Serbian national programs towards Bosnia and Herzegovina during the 19th century. And the most prominent and the most important, which I analyzed and tried to put the greatest focus, was Načetanje by Ilija Garašanin. Then the last part, secret societies and their links with Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then finally bibliography. As the few words on the last part or last chapter, it's I considered it really crucial to describe societies, or mainly unification or death, Young Bosnia, national defense, because while analyzing Slovak historiography, recent and older also, and Slovak textbooks, even on primary or secondary level, there exist a lot of how to say, cliches and myths which are connected to those mentioned organizations. So let's start with. I'll skip this. So the problem or the issue of Serbo-Bosnian relations is quite complicated and complex topic. So first of all, it's necessary to describe the constitutional status of both countries. So as we all know, Serbia was in 1878 still formally under the sovereignty of Ottoman Sultan, as well as Bosnia and Herzegovina itself, although Serbian Principality from 1815 progressed its own autonomous development, since Bosnia, after small revolts in the first part and second of 19th century, remained integral part of Ottoman Empire, and then after the Berlin Congress, upon the basis of 25th article of the Treaty of Berlin, passed continuously under the realm of Austria-Hungary, where it remained until 1918, and from 1908 it has become an integral part of Habsburg monarchy as condominium Bosnia and Herzegovina, managed jointly by the two parts of dual monarchy, by Austria and Hungary. So the mutual relationships between Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina can be viewed through the phenomenon of the Eastern Crisis, which took place in 1875 until 1878, when we can find an open support for Serbs living in Bosnia and Herzegovina by the Principality. Then the second complex is the annexion crisis, or Bosnian or First Balkan crisis, when the support from Serbia's side had been declared only through diplomatic channels. For example, as I return back to the Eastern Crisis, we can find in proclamation of Milan Obrenović from 18th June that soon expire 1 year from the day when our brothers in Bosnia and Herzegovina revolted to defend themselves against the highest violence and arbitrariness. The second proclamation, which is called to my beloved nation, again, I called you to arms on 1st December last year for the second time. I called you not only on behalf of our oppressed brothers, but also on behalf of independence of our dear country. So it implies that he considered the whole, I would say, also the Bosnia and Serbs living in Bosnia as a part of one nation and probably one state. So after Berlin Congress, after 1878, we could really hardly find some kind of this such words used in official declarations of Serbian dynasties. So, for example, I compared it with a lot of, for example, with one from 1888 called Serbs. So, also I would say interesting is the Montenegrin attitude during the crisis, where Nikola I addressed the inhabitants of Herzegovina in June 1876 by words. Again, that I will read just the part of it. The treasure chest of memories of our rich history and glorious flagship of the Serbian nation march under my flag. So again, there's the same rhetoric, the same or nearly the same words used in the proclamation by the Montenegrin ruler. So then, in the second one, Montenegrins, blood of our knights has been spilled on the battlefields of Herzegovina, because we cannot silently watch our brothers and do not help them. So, and then he used also the how to say, very common and repeated notion of Kosovo battle. So these are examples of it. So the next point is it's necessary to answer that it is very important to distinguish official support from the Serbian dynasties and governments, and on the other hand, secret organizations that operated outside the formal structures of the government. And the third part, political activities of Serbs within Bosnia and Herzegovina itself, because sometimes in historiography you may find a lot of myths and a lot of authors cannot divide the boundaries between these three sections. So also the Serbo-Bosnian relationships between the breakup of the First World War could be seen in the purely Serbian view. So unification within a single state without territories where Serbs created minority, although the most programs which are analyzed later avoid this argument. Then very complex and very complicated and controversial Greater Serbian or Great Serbian view, so the claim for territories without Serbian majority. Also, again, you may find a lot of cliches, not only in contemporary contemporary historiography, but also in historical documents, in historical books. For example, I can just quote one example. So it's one of the newer Slovak and Hungarian books written on history of Austria-Hungary, where it's written that nationalists dreaming about Greater Serbia didn't consider the territory to be liberated territory of the Neretva River Valley. So sometimes it's analyzed without further context and the basic analysis of sources. Then the next view could be Yugoslav, so linking Southern Slavs without ethnic or confessional determination, however, declared by Gabriel Princip itself and many others. So the common relationships or relations can be divided into several historical stages. So I tried to elaborate some kind of a system of this chronology. So from 1804 to 1875, it's like a preparation phase of national program, of first period of non-intervention, whereas Serbia didn't have enough or sufficient foreign policy power to be able to actively pursue its foreign policy towards Bosnia and Herzegovina. Although in this period many national programs were created which considered Bosnia and Herzegovina as part of the Serbian ethnic area. So the next stage is it's connected with the beginning of Eastern Crisis, and it lasts until 1878 or 1881. So the period of let's say intervention, where Serbia's attitude to compatriots in Bosnia and Herzegovina was promoted on a new level before the occupation by Austria-Hungary. Also, there appeared the first Serbian-Turkish War and many other important events took place. So, the Congress of Berlin marked the end of the interference in the affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina from Serbia, since it became part of the Habsburg monarchy, and as it was said today also, that the policy of Serbia had to be directed towards Old Serbia, so-called Old Serbia, Macedonia, Kosovo, and Northern Albania. And the important turning point was the signing of the secret treaty in June 1881. And the last part, or the last stage, occurred from 1903 to 1908 or 13. So the important event came in 1903. It was may overthrow the change of ruling dynasty, and also the foreign policy and orientation change. Although Bosnia and Herzegovina remained firmly outside the Serbian active role. So just maybe I don't know if we have a little. Okay, so as I said, I also analyzed Serbian national programs. The most important was Načrtanje and the role of Serbian secret societies, which role was directed towards unification with Serbia within the single nation. So just the sources I used, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have enough time for discussion, and I can imagine this discussion as a dialogue also. And of course, everybody in this room can ask lecturers. Yes, I'm sorry. We have enough time for discussion, and I can imagine this discussion as a dialogue. And of course, everybody in this room can ask lecturers. In the title of our session was Roads to War in Southeastern Europe, but the lecturers were speaking only about Serbia and Austria-Hungary. About other Southeastern European countries, not. I think that in this region, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was many conflicts and war conflicts too, but nobody can imagine the dimensions of the First World War. When Austria-Hungary declared war to Serbia, Serbian Prime Minister, the session of the Serbian government said that Austria-Hungary declared war to us, it will be the finish of Austria. But we can say that he predicted the disintegration of Austria-Hungary, but I think that he wasn't sure in this solution. And certainly he cannot know how great dimensions of suffering are expected to Serbia, the great dimension of the demographic collapse. I think it was the very expensive price Serbia paid for the First World War. Please.
I would like to ask a question about. I would like to ask.
Are we not going to have people, the panelists, up in front? I mean, who are we asking the questions?
Yes, please come here.
I would like to address my question to the last panelist, because you dealt most with the secret societies which were active in Bosnia from the times of the Great Eastern Crisis up until the beginning of the First World War. I think in this Great Eastern Crisis also there are already secret societies active in Bosnia, which were in a way supported, or the infrastructure was provided from Serbia or not. But even in that period, there's already this dilemma. I would like to ask you if you see during this whole period, from the Great Eastern Crisis until the First World War, some continuity in these secret societies.
Well, you mean towards Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Yes.
I would say that the fact is that Serbs of Bosnia and Herzegovina were for a long period without formal support of the official government. So they had to, to build closer ties with, for example, secret societies, and also they had to build the closer ties with the Serbs, not only in Serbian Principality and then and later Kingdom itself, but also with Serbs in Vojvodina and other regions. So I would say that this was the quite crucial fact that affected the emergence and the cooperation within the secret societies. As mentioned, for example, Young Bosnia and the Black Hand was also discussed today.
I would like to ask a follow-up question, because maybe I was not clear enough. Like the setting up of these secret societies, in some ways, was directly the Serbian government was involved. For example, Garašanin, he organized a network of informants throughout Bosnia.
Yes.
Later in the Great Eastern Crisis, Jovanovski, as the Serbian Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, organized this network. And there's always this ambiguity of, we organize a network, spread ideas, later something happens, and then, okay, it was not officially supported. Is there, in this question of also the responsibility of the Serbian government for the actions of Mlada Bosna, could we see a continuity in this ambiguity between spreading ideas, spreading a network, informing, training, educating Bosnian Serbs, and later not taking responsibility for the actions of these people?
Well, it's you said a very good remark that also Garašanin tried to elaborate the system of agents and support, and although it was secret draft, it wasn't officially published later, much later. So I would say that this ambiguity is continued through the whole period, as it's maybe sometimes it's more let's say comfortable to build a secret network, and then okay, it's not our you know, it's not our business. But I can agree with you, absolutely.
Yes.
I must intervene because we must consider this topic in broader framework. First, for example, Austria supported secret Serbian organizations in 18th century. Then national revolutions in Balkans began through a network of secret organizations of Serbs, Greeks. Their relations with Italy are very important. That's how Italy became a single nation in 19th century, although the differences between the north, south, and regions were much bigger than differences between Croats, Serbs, Bosnians, Montenegrins, etc., etc., etc. I mean, Yugoslavs are more closer to each other than Italians, French, etc., etc. No more than 1/3 of French could understand the Marseillaise at the end of 18th century, and we could understand us on Balkans in much broader space. So it's very complicated. But it was 18th and 19th century, so the role of secret organizations must not be considered as much important at the beginning of 20th century, as the decisions were made by politicians or by military, and secret organizations were just makers. I mean, the assassination in Sarajevo was just a trouble. It just happened. It was the very beginning, but it was not important because everybody was preparing to go to war. The French thought that they will win the war and that the war will endure 2 months, not 4 years, etc., etc. So it's much complicated question, and it's important. But as the states grew through 19th century, getting their independence and institutions, these groups were becoming less and less important, although the assassination in Sarajevo was of much importance.
I'd like to ask a question and first make a comment and say that thank you, all three of you, for the presentations. I thought they were remarkably broad in scope and deep temporally, and that all of you gave us a real great overview of the topics that you were covering. And Professor Samardžić, I want to thank you in particular for your very personal statement of your family experience, and also to say that the rest of us are glad that you are here, even if so many of your colleagues did not come. I think we share your hope that more historians will participate in activities that pertain to this area, as well as yourself. My question is mainly directed to Marko. You've described these radical shifts in the foreign policy relations between Serbia and Austria throughout the 19th century. What I wonder is, how deep did these changes go in society, in the two societies concerned? Did the average person on the streets of Belgrade know the difference between when they were allied with Austria and when they were hostile to it? Or was this really just a matter of diplomatic alignments in the chambers of diplomatic conversations?
Thank you. Well, I think it's more than just a question of diplomatic sort of shifts. I mean, this sort of fissure in Serbian politics is quite fundamental to the country's history. So the fact that you had with the sort of Serbian uprisings culminating in the establishment of an autonomous Serbia under Prince Miloš, a sort of new Serbia emerging, a new elite, a new sort of layer over the peasantry, which then kind of came to be seen as kind of sort of parasitical or sort of oppressor of the ordinary Serbian people, which then in turn provoked a kind of a reaction among the sort of peasantry, a kind of series of peasant uprisings, which then found expression through the formation of the Radical Party, and there's these opposition Serbian elements who tended to see the sort of the new Serbian elite as being kind of an alien imposition on Serbia, which defied its natural traditions. So first the liberals, sort of 1840s and 50s, who really sort of try to sort of develop kind of Serbian Whig tradition, sort of seen as sort of as alien, followed by a kind of the radicals, who are kind of the more sort of looked at the peasantry as a sort of real repository of sort of Serbian national spirit. So these divisions sort of then were kind of quite important, and for the sort of the radicals, this opposition to Austria-Hungary, this sort of pro-Russian orientation, was quite sort of fundamental to their kind of ideology, and that was the sort of the party which had a kind of enjoyed the loyalty of the mass of the Serbian peasant population. Whereas again, sort of I try to stress, this sort of Serbian military elite was kind of grew up under like Austro-Hungarian umbrella. So there was, I think, among the more educated people, a sort of sense in which these two Serbias represent something more than just diplomatic alignments. Now, I think from the point of view of ordinary Serbian people, peasants, they didn't have a lot of affection or loyalty to the monarchs. Prince, later King Milan, was not a popular monarch, neither was King Alexander. So they tended to sort of take their lead from the radical party. So when the radicals came to change hand to power by the coup of 1903 and began to reorient Serbia more directly to more overtly to a kind of sort of anti-Austro-Hungarian, more pro-Russian, pro-French policy, that then did represent more than just diplomatic realignment, actually a sort of shift in the nature of Serbia, representing a sort of like coming to age of a sort of the Serbia of the radicals, of the people, as it were. And then again, this sort of shift within the officer corps to a sort of anti-Austrian position, manifested by this sort of shift to the younger conspirators under Apis and his group, also represented sort of seismic shifts. So I would sort of stress that this alignment then was really much more than just diplomatic realignment, but a sort of culmination of these long-term trends.
I'm Bojan Alexov. First, maybe a continuation of a comment on Donja's comment. Unfortunately, we know very little what the average Joe or Dragan or Milorad on Belgrade Street thought. And part of the problem is also this conference and not a solution because of our fascination with high politics, diplomacy, and violence. There are some ethnographic research from central Serbia where the first Balkan War came as a total surprise how uninformed the peasants were and shocked. But then war did make difference. So the major influence was war on nationalism and not the other way around. Yeah? So war brought nationalism and not nationalism war, or if one can simplify it like this. And I'm sorry, I wanted to comment actually on Marko's presentation, and it's not a criticism because I will face the same situation this afternoon. It's the framework and of these short presentations where we can't really say much meaningful, but and I did appreciate you trying to position this complexity or different trends, though I would like to criticize the binary opposition of these two. At one point you even said the modern Austrian, and then the peasant radical. And there is a problem in these binaries because what is modern? Everything is modern. And if you look, just one example, radicals advocated and eventually established the full suffrage. So in most of the terms we consider suffrage as a modern aspect of society, and the pro-Austrians and Austria itself was not modern in that respect. And if we look at Austria, we have at the same time Sigmund Freud, or we have Austria as the birthplace of modern anti-Semitism. But if we look at the funeral arrangements of Franz Ferdinand and Sophie Chotek, we see that Austria is probably the most backward or conservative society in Europe at that time. So the picture is more complex than any binaries we might project. Thank you.
Someone behind you.
Conor Clearing from Regensburg. My two questions go mainly to Professor Samardžić. How would we measure, in the first place, responsibility or irresponsibility in actors acting in that period? And the second thing is, was Serbia really not going to plan to go, wasn't Serbia planning to go to war on Austria in the long run? And I would like to give reason to my questions. I would dare to say that the political elites in Austria-Hungary felt deeply provoked by Serbian behavior and had felt so for years, at least from the Bosnian annexation crisis. We had that slide by the colleague from Slovakia on Jovanovski, and he, for example, wrote so strongly anti-Austrian at the Bosnian annexation crisis, and after that Austrian representatives in Belgrade had reasons, by this example and other examples, to suppose that Serbia was preparing to aggressively attack the empire. On the other hand, was it irresponsible by the Serbian elite and army to prepare for war? I don't know. The situation in the Balkans were very unstable, and they had their... it was a reasonable reasoning to think that you need a strong army in that situation, and then you need to be prepared for war and for going into war. And whereas the second question, whereas the government didn't have plans to go into war in 1914, that's for sure. Again, weren't there plans to go to war on Bosnia in the longer run? If you read what elite members wrote about it, and Marko, Attila, Hoare presented the Apis faction as one of the two power centers of the empire of Serbia. So if the assault on Franz Ferdinand came from one of the two power centers, I mean that is really a provocation of the other part. And it wasn't that it was just an everyday experience to have your prince heritage assaulted on the street. So it did have a meaning, and in the broader picture, of course, it was France, it was Germany, and everybody else, but it was not by chance that the war started here.
Okay, thank you. Of course, we cannot measure responsibility or irresponsibility, but I'm not sure that we should measure everything that was happening in the past. Even if we are able, I think that everybody was irresponsible because nobody really could predict what will happen. And even while entering into war, the big powers thought that the war will be short and victorious. on the other side, you raised a very important question, and it's anti-Austrian policy in Serbia, and also we should mention very strong anti-Serbian feelings that arose in Vienna and other European capitals after the 28th of June. Also, we should consider the French and Russian influence on Serbia after 1903 that led the Serbian official policy and public opinion into collision, into a war with Austria. I must notice here that very much was cited Gerašini's načrtanje, etc., etc. I'm not sure if much of contemporaries were really reading that paper, and that was mostly, it was a plagiarism because it was a Polish similar article translated into Serbian. It was not an original, genuine Serbian program, but most important was the press and cafes where people were sitting and discussing policy. Also was very important the dynasty change in 1903. Although there were parts of Serbia very pro-Brenović orientated, they were very popular in certain parts of Serbia, and you even have contemporary Serbian families that claim they are pro-Brenović orientated, but they are very few. If Serbia was preparing to war with Austria, I'm not too sure. And the Serbian government was very unstable, weak, and confused in months that were preceding the war. The army was politically strong, but also not prepared for the war. If you measure the casualties in Serbia in First World War, you will conclude that irresponsibility could be measured by these facts. Thank you.
So I'll just sort of respond to Bojan's point. No, I didn't want to sort of claim that the Radical Party was somehow anti-modern, or that sort of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was representing modernity. What I was saying was something a bit different, which is that the Serbian revolutions or the Serbian uprisings had given rise to a sort of new Serbian elite, which was sort of following sort of European styles, and that was seen by peasantry as both as oppressive in terms of its exploitation, but also as kind of something culturally alien. And the Radical Party itself kind of gave a sort of voice to this peasant opposition. The Radical Party was, a modern political party. They weren't sort of, if you like, men just from the woods. They weren't men from the woods. This was kind of sort of a modern, initially revolutionary party which adopted the kind of Jacobinical model of sort of extreme national sovereignty, the nation one and indivisible. But it sort of drew upon this kind of peasant or conservative opposition to the sort of the new Serbian elite that had arisen during the 19th century. And this ideology of sort of Svetozar Marković, who was kind of like, since the ideological sort of forerunner of the radicals, did consciously view the event, sort of social differentiation that had taken place during the 19th century, the sort of modernization of Serbia along capitalist lines, as a source of corruption for Serbia. So he sort of Svetozar Marković kind of idealized traditional Serbian society and sort of saw development of modern capitalism as bringing sort of debauchery and drunkenness and sort of corruption stemming from the towns. Now, of course, the Radical Party was a sort of modern party and had to kind of reconcile these different trends. So, it wasn't by any means, they weren't by any means opposed to all forms of economic development. I mean, in some sense, they were more interested in sometimes protecting Serbian industry than the more overtly pro-Austrian sort of progressive party were. But they nevertheless, they did kind of form a kind of give some sort of voice to peasant discontent with this sort of modern, new, sort of Europeanized elite. And at the same time, so they had to sort of, the radicals had to kind of reconcile these conflicting traditions, and they did sort of try and do so. In terms of this question of suffrage, I'd also note that the Radical Party was, after the First World War, opposed to sort of female suffrage, so they represented the kind of opposition to the full emancipation of women, so I couldn't really accept that they were fully modern in that respect either. But I certainly don't want to sort of present, you know, sort of a simplistic picture of backward radicals versus modern pro-Austrians. Thank you.
Thanks. If I may, just to build upon the words said by Professor, the question of the Serbia's willingness to enter the war, as you've asked, I also think that we have to consider the fact that the Serbia was in the condition and time when they faced 3 wars within the very maybe short time, 3 wars, which had a great impact on the army and the whole society. So that's one point which is very important to answer if we talk about their responsibility or willingness to enter the war and the position of Serbia towards the war itself. And then it's very necessary, or it's a very good source to answer and to seek the answers. That is the analysis of Serbian telegraphs with, for example, Russian foreign ministry when they asked if it's okay or what should we do, because it was very complicated for Serbia, and we can see the results of this. So I think it's the most important. If we want to partially answer this question, it's the analysis of these documents. I suppose it was Gail Stokes who made a very good research on that point. So it's just my remark on that.
I want to quote again Mr. Nikola Pasic, Serbian Prime Minister. In 1913, he wrote a letter to Mr. Svetozar Pribicevic, the leader of the Croatian-Serbian coalition in Zagreb. And in this letter, he suggested to him have a peaceful policy towards Hungarian government, because Serbia is not ready for a new war conflict.
Ja ću pitanje postaviti na bosanskom jeziku. Koliki je utjecaj Rusije na atentat u Sarajevu preko Mustafe Golubića, koji je učestvovao u organizaciji Crne ruke, i zašto je ekshumiran posle Drugog svjetskog rata i premješten u Moskvu. Hvala.
Sorry, but we don't know the answer for it.
Hello. I would like to direct my question to all of the panelists, or whoever wants to answer. A lot has been said on who is at fault for World War I, and it's usually treated as a failure in international affairs and diplomacy. My question is, if it was not for technology, if it wasn't for barbed wire, for machine guns, or tanks, would World War I be known as the War of 1914 and maybe have several thousand casualties rather than several million? And if so, do you think that maybe we're putting too much blame on diplomacy and international affairs? Is this really the first instance of technology backfiring on us? And what implications does that have in the age of information going forward? Thanks.
Well, to sort of begin with the first question, I think Mustafa Golubic was certainly one of the members of a circle who were kind of in the background of the Sarajevo assassination, and he had those links with Russian intelligence. I mean, the point to remember is that these countries weren't simply homogeneous wholes. We talk about Russia as being one voice or one sort of one opinion. In a sense, there were different power centers and different factions, elements working as sort of loggerheads with each other. It's not that Russia actually wanted war at that point, but there were certainly elements who were sort of, in fact, were agitating for it. So this von Hartwig, the Russian sort of ambassador in Serbia, was one of those people who was pushing for a more aggressive policy and by Serbia. So I mean, just to sort of respond to the last question, I'd say perhaps this is something which Christopher Clark and I mentioned in his book, which is the most recent sort of comprehensive study of the outbreak of the war, stresses in some sense it was a sort of, in some sense, not fully modern war, because he did have his diplomats in different sections of the state working at variance with one another, and his misunderstandings between these different sections contributed to the outbreak of war. So in some sense it was still not a fully modern war in that respect.
Greetings to all. My name is Amela Hadželić. I have a question for Professor Samardžić. Everybody is referring to the assassination as the assassination, so my question is, why do you use the term Sarajevo accident? Can you please elaborate?
I use it literally. Sorry if that led to confusion. It was assassination. It was not a terrorist attack, because the one who had to be murdered was murdered. In terrorist attacks, you have random victims. Yeah, necessarily they are random victims, by definition.
Hello, my name is Sabina Veladic. I'm from Institute in Sarajevo. I'm not sure whether this is the right time or place to give a comment on last night's question, provocative question, whether more knowledge will lead to reconciliation. I say, I'm not sure this is the right place and time, but I would like to ask who and how will define what objective knowledge is? And can we say that objective knowledge, in a naive manner speaking, is maybe illusion, since these days we have developed market of different interpretations that are recognized as though subjective but true? Are these different perspectives and different interpretations are recognized as knowledge? And also I would like to give a comment on Maroš. I saw one sentence in your text that Serbia aspirations toward Bosnia was, in a sense, it was written like natural aspiration. Maybe not word aspiration. Should we as historians use this word natural in this organic ideological sense? And also would like to give one comment. I believe that official name and denomination of our language is Bosnian, not Bosniak. That's all, thank you.
okay, maybe I didn't use the right word as I wrote natural. Maybe reasonable would be quite better, but the one important point of my presentation was that I really wanted to show the relationships and the visions of Serbs towards Bosnia and Herzegovina in the scope of 19th century. I didn't want to watch through my eyes nowadays in 21st century, which is absolutely different, and it's different in its pure concept, in its essence. So it's important to elaborate also the mentioned programs which were created during the 19th century as a product of 19th century. It's very complicated if we try to compare it with nowadays and issues and the knowledge and everything which is available for us now. So maybe as your comment, it was written through the eyes of Serbs in 19th century. So it was this concept was very often, and it appeared in nearly every program elaborated as I it was well, I would say natural, but it was normal in those days to perceive it as natural. So that's my comment on it.
Samo na moment, dobar dan, pozdravljam vas, Sonja Dujmović, Institut za istoriju. Pošto se osjećam kao kod kuće, ja ću sjesti govoriti svojim jezikom. Htjela bih samo komentarisati diskusiju, ukratko. To je jedna stvar, da li, obzirom da su bosanski Srbi bili bez formalne podrške, da su onda krenuli na saradnju u srbijanskim strukturama prema tajnim udruženjima. Ja mislim, odnosno, da li su u stvari srbijanske strukture imale s kim da razgovaraju u Bosni i Hercegovini? Znači, da li je postojala struktura u Bosni i Hercegovini s kojim bi zvanična Srbija u svojim kao nastojanjima za neku zaštitu interesa Srba u Bosni i Hercegovini mogla da razgovara? Mislim da je to vrlo upitno pitanje, da u stvari te izgrađene strukture nije ni bilo. Govorimo o 19. vijeku i u momentima od načrtanja pa nadalje. Ako ova dosadašnja historiografija govori s kim su je u stvari moglo se sarađivati, mi vidimo jednu šaroliku strukturu, šaroliko društvo koje uključuje čak ne samo Srbe, nego i Hrvate, odnosno katoličko stanovništvo, odnosno Franjevce tačnije, a sa srpske neke sa nekog pravoslavne, da je tako, provenijencije više, to su trgovci u koje čak i te neke strukture koje žele saradnju sa Srbijom, iz Srbije sa Bosnom, ne vjeruju. Oni su vrlo sumnjiva kategorija, promjenljiva, vrlo interesna, tako da se u stvari trebalo sačekati jedna intelektualna, jedna nacionalno svjesna i jedna, kako bi rekla, gotova za saradnju baza i struktura s kojom bi u stvari moglo da se sarađuje. Znači nije bilo u Bosni te kritične mase koja je u stvari mogla da nosi i da odgovori na možda ili ponudu ili na odbijanje od strane Srbije. Znači to je vrijeme koje mi samo projeciramo kao neku totalnu oformljenu grupu koja ovdje funkcioniše u nekom srpskom smislu, tako dalje. Mi treba da samo sjetimo 1852. je u stvari u Sarajevu, ili tako, na Malti, pravoslavnom stanovništvu koji su sebe nazivali Rišćani, govorili vi niste Rišćani, vi ste Srbi. Znači, to je, na to treba računati, to je vrlo kratko vrijeme. I s kim u stvari te tajne organizacije sarađuju u Bosni, krajem 19. stoljeća, to su u stvari trgovci koji imaju neki interes tamo, ne znam, to su neke strukture koje su, to su mladi svijet, i uopće nema izgrađene intelektualne strukture. Mi moramo računati s tim da koji je broj u stvari studenata završenih, ne znam, 1902. kad se osnima srpsko, recimo, kulturno društvo prosvjeta za podržavanje studiranja, i to je to intelektualna intelita koja je u stvari formirano u Austro-Ugarskoj. Za sad, hvala vam na, evo mogu, Aleksa.
Ja mogu da dopunim ovo pitanje i apsolutno se slažem sa Sonjom, a bitno je zbog razumevanja uloge ovih tajnih udruženja, jer upravo Austrija svojom upravom ne dozvoljava nastajanje i formiranje legitimnih političkih predstavnika Srba u ovom periodu i kao alternativu uvodi nešto što se naziva habsburški ili jozefinski konfesionalizam, znači za legitimne predstavnike Srba, a i Hrvata i bosanskih muslimana, nameće njihove verske lidere. Ti verski lideri su svi lojalni, pro-habsburški orijentisani i predstavljaju interese krune, a ne svojih vernika. I to je glavni problem tokom čitavog perioda austrijske dominacije, koji se tek delimično nakon smrti Kalaja i nakon promjena delimično menja. Tako da to objašnjava zašto se pojavljuju i trgovci i tajna udruženja, a onda i ovi mladići, ubice ili teroristi. Zato što taj koji treba da predstavlja interese Srba, on se ovdje zove u Sarajevu Evgenije Letica i on drži 3 metra veliku portret Franje Josifa u svoj spavaćoj sobi. O tome se radi.
Zdravka Elaska, Marijan, Hrvatski institut za povijest. Htjela bi profesora Samardžića zapravo zamoliti za jedno pojašnjenje, odnosno neke usporedbe. Dosta je, recimo, zadnje vrijeme popularno raspravljati o tome je li sarajevski atentat teroristički čin ili nije. Vi ste se opredijelili za ovu interpretaciju kojoj se radi o ubistvu koji nije ujedno i teroristički čin, barem nije u onom modernom smislu koje podrazumijeva mnogo civilnih žrtava. Međutim, atentati tog vremena su mahom drugačiji. Sad me zanima da li smatrate da se na isti način onda može interpretirati i ubistvo carice Sisi ili nešto kasnijem razdoblju ubistvo kralja Aleksandra u Marseju, da li biste na isti način onda se postavili prema VMRO kao prema Crnoj Ruci? Evo, zahvaljam.
I think that there are similarities. One difference is between the assassination of King Alexander Obrenović and his wife in 1903. That was a really savage act, and among the murderers were some of the distinguished members of Belgrade local elites, and that's how this murder was very special among all these others. If it's a terrorist act, or not, it is also a question that embraces the points of view, the different points of view, and they may be also legitimate while interpreting what was happening a century ago. Because we are not here gathered to draw any final conclusions, because we are not historians as mathematicians or physicians. We are not drawing any natural laws. So it's also everything due to interpretation. But what I wanted to remark here, and what we can think about during this conference, is while we are watching the Serbian-Bosnian relations in one way, because you have Bosnians in Serbia living for centuries as Bosnians. Izetbegović families, I think, from Belgrade. And they came from Serbia to... So if you asked whether we should consider any national policy from that era as natural, well, we are a kind of same people if we are not the same nation or nationality, or if we don't speak the same language, although we do speak the same language, but with different names. So I think it's very complicated, because you have Bosnians that live in Serbia, but you lack a Bosnian policy at that era, because you lack a Bosnian state at that era. That's why Serbs are active in Bosnia. It's why you have so much Serbian writers and poets who due their appearance to the Austrian rule. Austrian rule was autocratic, but was also enlightening. So Austria helped Serbs to raise the national questions and lead to the first world conflict. I cited Petr Kočić, who was a very active anti-Austrian promoter, and we all learned his short story Badger, right, as a scene from an Austrian court, which was invented because Austrian courts were much more efficient than any other court in the region, etc., etc., etc. So it's very complicated, and I should not watch the Serbian-Bosnian relation as one way direction, although the one that was leading to Serbian aspirations to Bosnia was much more important. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohamed Nametak. I come from Institute of Sarajevo, and I will express my thoughts about this conference and the expose of the esteemed colleagues. If you don't mind, I'll sit. In my opinion, we have two big issues in research of this great war. When I was attending the conference in Vienna earlier this year, I noticed that Western historians that come from across the ocean do not, if I may say, understand the complexity of inter-ethnic relations between the people that live here. That's one problem. The second thing is that I have a feeling that whatever we try and whatever we try to appear objective, I must say that I noticed that the background of researchers and historians inevitably influence their thoughts and what they said here. And this debate here proved that 100% in my opinion. I must say that, for example, Mr. Samardžić, who I appreciate very much, when he said 1877 that Turkish crews left Belgrade and Serbian cities, he missed to say that much of the civilian population also left at that time. So I think we must try. I don't want to say this as a critic, but we must try to we must try to make a distance and to try to look and try to be more objective. I'm not saying this as a critique to anyone specific, but as a historians as in general. Thank you.
The most of the civilians left long before. When Serbian uprisers in 1806 entered into Belgrade, they started killing everyone, not asking who nations they were, because they were all in Turkish robes. And them as peasants considered every citizen as an enemy. So it was not my topic. And I'm not so sure if nationality really matters. I mean, I think you're exaggerating.
I'm just sort of to go back to some of the points which you raised earlier by Sonia and others. I mean, this, I think it's important to remember that this assassination was the work of fringe elements, and that among the Bosnian elites before the First World War there was a broad acceptance of Habsburg rule. So you say, generally speaking, that the Bosniaks and Croats broadly accept this, and even the Serb elites were sort of accepting it. And there was a sort of tendency towards a sort of movement for Bosnian autonomy and a sort of pushing for autonomy of Bosnia within the Habsburg Empire. Nevertheless, it was a world away from that and the sort of extremism that sort of manifested in the assassination. And so this sort of young Bosnian network itself was kind of a sort of amorphous, sort of ill-defined group, and it was a sort of kind of constituency in which you could sort of the Black Hand could find these recruits ready to carry out assassination. But you know, it was a fringe movement. It did not represent any kind of expression of the Bosnian Serb, let alone general Bosnian desire for national liberation in that respect. So I think you have to bear that in mind. It was a work of fringe elements, not representing the Bosnian national struggle or the Bosnian elites.
Any other questions? I think that we can finish our session with great satisfaction. I think that it was a very interesting discussion. And after this, it will be a coffee break. It was from 11, but we will finish 10 minutes before, but it's not a problem. Thank you very much for us.